Oh, thank you, Representative Taylor. That's amazing. Thank you, thank you. Okay, today we've tried to bring you some amazing speakers. I hope you'll be as impressed as I am with the caliber of information and who you get it from today. And kicking us off, I'm super excited to introduce Rachel Patterson. She's our first speaker and is a national health and disability policy leader with expertise in Medicaid, acute care, and home and community-based services, Medicare, Social Security, and civil rights. As Disability Policy Director for the White House Disability Policy Council 2023 through 2024, Rachel oversaw all federal disability policy during this time. Rachel has roots in Washington State, but she currently practices law in Washington, D.C. Please give a warm welcome to Rachel Patterson. And I just want to let all the speakers know, there's a little prompter here. You've got a clicker. There's a bottle of water. If you need anything else, just let me know.
Okay, am I good on this one? Okay, it's so great to be here. One tiny correction, I'm not a lawyer. I just sort of pretend to be one when I work on, Medicaid and Social Security and all of our policies. Like Stacey said, I had the honor of being the Disability Policy Director for the Biden-Harris White House in the last 2 years of the term on the Domestic Policy Council. It was an incredible experience. My background is in disability advocacy, worked at a number of advocacy organizations before the White House, and then in January of this year, launched my own firm with a business partner where we work on health and disability advocacy with organizations in DC. So it's government relations and lobbying. I'm up on the Hill most days. Of course, right now we are not totally, but almost totally focused on Medicaid and the reconciliation bill that's working through Congress and doing what we can to stop any cuts to Medicaid. And one of the things we talk about a lot actually is you can't just hand these decisions to the state legislature and say, you solve it. What they're trying to do is pull money out of the system, pull money away from states. And so we're doing what we can to fight against that, because we know even if the bill doesn't say, oh, we're cutting home and community-based services, if they force states' hands, that's what's going to happen. So that's what we're talking about a lot. I hope you are in touch with your members of Congress as state legislators, sharing that. This was not even part of my presentation. I just started talking and was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is starting with a lot of history, not necessarily of developmental disability, but the policies that we have. Let's see. Great. And one of the themes and one of the ways that I think about public policy is it carries the legacy of the time in which it was created, of the people, of their ideas, of what was progressive and what was conservative at the time. And so I'm going to go through sort of the history of what we have and then try and end with how that ends up shaping the life of a person with a developmental disability today. So that's the goal. So sort of going through time, covering how we got subminimum wage, how we got the DD network, how we got civil rights, how we got special education, how we got SSI, and how we got home and community-based services. So really quick, and I know future speakers are going to dig into some of these more, especially on the HCBS side. So because of that, I want to start with FDR and the New Deal. FDR was disabled. He developed polio as an adult. He was a wheelchair user, but at that time, he did his best to hide it from the American public because of fear that he wouldn't be considered a leader. He wouldn't be able to lead the country in the way that he did. The New Deal, of course, was gigantic, but there's two things I want to talk about most. One is the creation of Social Security, which at the time was an old age pension system, old age insurance. We didn't have anything for people who were working and then became disabled. We didn't have anything really for people who were born with disability. It was an old age program. I also created the first national minimum wage in the Fair Labor Standards Act. And while they were at it, they created the sub-minimum wage. So as long as we've had a minimum wage, we've had a sub-minimum wage. And if you look at the legislative history and you look at how it's drafted, it says, well, to prevent curtailment of employment opportunities. And you can see what they were trying to do. Minimum wage is a whole new thing. And so, oh, well, I can see that people who are less productive, we still want to make sure that they can get jobs. We don't want to keep them from jobs. So you can almost see it as a pro-disability employment policy there in 1938. It was a long time ago. Things have changed since then, but we still have that section of the law. So this is my first example of policies. They carry these legacies of the times in which they were created and what might have been, progressive at the time. Then I want to talk about the Kennedys. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on these folks. The Kennedy family was gigantic. There were 9 children. I think in this photo, the youngest one had not yet been born. But I'm going to talk about John, Eunice, and Rosemary. Rosemary had an intellectual disability and probably some mental health conditions. In the historical record, it's a little bit hard to tell. It was a long time ago. Eunice was Rosemary's sister and was her main champion and advocate. Rosemary was part of the family, as you can see in this photo. She wasn't initially sent away, hidden away. When Joe Kennedy Sr. was ambassador to the UK, she was presented at court with her sisters in finery. But in the 1940s, Joe Kennedy Sr., without discussing it with his wife or any of the other children or Rosemary herself, got Rosemary a lobotomy. And she was never the same. And after that, that's when she was hidden away. In part because Joe Sr. wanted his sons to have political careers. John wasn't the oldest. Joe Jr. was the oldest, but he died in World War II. So the legacy, the plan passes to John. And Joe Sr. thought, well, we can't have Rosemary in the picture. That will hurt John's political chances. So John Kennedy becomes president, and Eunice really, really pushes him to take on disability. He's inaugurated January of 1961. In October, he creates the president's panel on what was then called mental retardation. In December of 1961, Joe Sr. has a stroke. And that changes things. Because he is no longer, he's still living, but he has really significant disabilities himself. So he's no longer controlling that family with an iron fist. Eunice is the one who tries to then start acknowledging Rosemary and bring Rosemary out of the shadows. This president's panel comes up with all of these recommendations. And this was a time, this doesn't happen so much anymore, when you would create these panels and they would create legislative recommendations and then Congress would do them. I know. So he signs really one of the first bills in October of 1963 aimed at addressing mental health and intellectual disability. The bill that would then go on to be what we call the Deedy Act. So it started with the university centers, later added the Developmental Disabilities Councils and the Protection and Advocacy Agencies. So this starts in the 1960s, and it starts with Eunice and Rosemary. Eunice goes on to found Special Olympics. Unfortunately, Rosemary's ability to participate is really, really limited by the terrible surgery that her father subjected her to. But she is more part of the family with Eunice after Joe Sr.'s stroke and then after his death. So another theme we're going to talk about here is being hidden away. If it's FDR hiding his disability, if it's Rosemary being hidden away. John Kennedy himself, by the way, had very serious injuries from World War II that he also did not share with the public. JFK is assassinated, of course, in November of 1963, about a month after he signed that bill, and Lyndon Johnson becomes president. Lyndon Johnson is a fascinating character. You're all legislators. I recommend, if you have not read the books about him, especially his time in the Senate, talk about an operator, a person who, I don't know, was he a good person? I think that's the big question of history. But he comes into office, and like any good politician, he knows not to waste a good crisis. So the country is mourning JFK, and so he uses this as an opportunity to launch his Great Society program. He that president's panel that Kennedy had created, LBJ makes permanent. And in like 4 years, he creates Medicare and Medicaid, passes the Civil Rights Act, passes the Fair Housing Act, passes the Voting Rights Act, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Higher Ed Act. There's more. These all have, almost all of them have impact on disability. I forget where I was going with that, but let's talk about Medicaid. It's created in 1965 at the same time as Medicare. A lot of people, sometimes people want to know why are Medicare and Medicaid different? It's because Medicare was at that point, and still mostly is, for older people, and we had a national Social Security program, so we're going to create a national Medicare program. Medicaid was for lower income people, the poorest Americans. At that point, cash welfare was really a state program, so we create this federal-state partnership. It's as simple as that. In 1964 and in 1965, people looked at the system that we had and said, oh yeah, we'll kind of build it on top of that. In Medicaid, nursing homes are mandatory. States have to cover them. Services outside of facilities aren't really covered. Medicare doesn't have a long-term care benefit. Still doesn't, really. Why not? Well, because in 1965, people didn't live that long. And also, isn't that what daughters are for? We live with that legacy today. And in Medicaid, we live with that legacy of institutional services being a mandatory benefit. Okay. Want to talk about civil rights? In the Nixon and Ford eras, civil rights probably doesn't come to mind when you think about Nixon and Ford, but the civil rights movement happened throughout the 1960s, but a lot of those legacies still continue, especially when it comes to disability rights. And people with disabilities themselves are starting to be more engaged and, again, come out of the shadows and push for civil rights. So I'm actually going to switch the order of these. So in 1973, you have the Rehabilitation Act. The Rehabilitation Act had existed since like the 20s. It created vocational rehabilitation. But in 1973, you get Section 504. Section 504 is very short, if you've ever read it. It just says you can't discriminate against people with disabilities if you get federal funds. Very short, but the impact is enormous across the federal government. This is where you get the 504 plan. Because of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that LBJ passed in the 1960s, schools are getting federal funds. You can't discriminate against people with disabilities. Because of Medicare and Medicaid, you can't discriminate against people with disabilities. That took a little longer to implement, but that's something that we'll also come to. Something else that I think is interesting is this bill was vetoed several times by President Nixon. This is a time when Congress and the president would go back and forth. This is something really led by the Congress, not by the president. He was not super interested in it, unlike in the LBJ era where he was really leading. This is being led by Congress. He vetoes it several times, but luckily it survives. Congress keeps trying, and Section 504 is included. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a young Senator Biden co-sponsored the bill. He joined Congress in January of 1973 and co-sponsored this version of the Rehab Act in February. A couple of years later, though, so Section 504 calls on each department to write regulations to implement this provision. The provision is very short. You need to implement it. You need to write regulations. You need to add detail. Through the Nixon administration, the Ford administration, there were regulations, they had been written, but they weren't getting put out. And the advocates knew this. So the picture I have here at the bottom says sign 504 now. That's with legendary disability rights activist Judy Heumann. They led a almost month-long sit-in. It was the early 1970s. Sit-ins were very big. They led an almost month-long sit-in in the federal building in San Francisco to push for these regulations to be put out, for this law to become real. Again, you're seeing people with disabilities out there leading the charge, not hidden away or not being willing to be hidden away, pushing for civil rights. Okay, I'm going to go back in time slightly to the creation of supplemental security income. This is something Congress creates to improve on a patchwork of systems that had created in the states. It's different than old age or disability Social Security. You don't have to have paid into the system. And it's created as a Medicaid eligibility pathway. This is something that makes sense at the time. This is for our lowest income folks. This is for people who are aged or disabled. This should, of course, be a Medicaid pathway, and we're going to get back to that. Okay, I know I'm just like doing a big list, but I promise it'll all come together. In 1975, we get what is at the time Education for All Handicapped Children Act, later became named as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This could be a whole, like, its own presentation. This is led by parents not wanting their children to be part of their public schools, wanting their children to be part of regular classrooms. Again, not hidden away. We want folks to be getting opportunities and being part of the society that they deserve to be a part of. So this is the first time students with disabilities have a right to an education. So started with Section 504, that helps a lot, but this is where we get special education and even more requirements. Okay, now we're in the Reagan era. The tenor is changing a little bit. In the 30s, in the 60s, in the 70s, you got the creation of massive programs, right? We've got Medicaid. It provides a lot of facility-based services. We've got SSI. It provides this eligibility pathway. But a problem that we have is the lack of home and community-based services. So in the early 1980s, Congress, working with President Reagan, creates the first home and community-based services programs. They're first named for a girl named Katie Beckett, who I know in later presentations you're going to learn a lot more about, but who was only able to get the life-saving services she needed in a hospital, and her parents wanted her to go home. This story really appealed to President Reagan. That's the Reagan and the Becketts. They're next to Air Force One, but it's optional for states. This is very different than 1965, when we created Medicaid and had nursing homes as a mandatory benefit. Not only is it optional, but you can have waiting lists. You can decide what services you want to cover. We're in a slightly more conservative era where Congress and the president, they're not going to just say states have to do this like they were willing to do in the 1960s. And that shapes a lot of what we have in home and community-based services today. Why it's so different in the states, why we have waiting lists, why people have so many challenges accessing it compared to facility-based services. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Bush era and the creation of the ADA. A couple things I want to talk about in these photos. So the guy in the cowboy hat is a guy named Justin Dart. Justin Dart Jr. Justin Dart Sr. was like a grocery magnate, a friend and political advisor of the first President Bush. So another theme that we have, that I know we have in this room, is personal connection. Be it the Kennedys and Rosemary, Justin Dart sitting there at the signing ceremony. And I'm a disability person. I've heard the name Justin Dart for years. And then I'm reading this biography of the first President Bush, and they started talking about Justin Dart, and I'm like, wait a second, I get it now. Why we get a conservative Republican president signing this into law. I also want to talk about Tom Harkin and Tony Coelho. Tony's the black and white photo. He has epilepsy. He's a member of Congress with epilepsy. Tom Harkin is a senator with a deaf brother. That's him signing a speech on the Senate floor. We have these personal connections. Okay, and Katie, I'm not going to forget about Steny. In 2008, the second President Bush signs into law the ADA Amendments Act, which strengthens it. From 1990, there were a series of Supreme Court cases that kind of undermined the civil rights protections of the ADA. And so Congress, including with Steny Hoyer, who had a spouse with epilepsy, with Jim Langevin, who had spinal cord injury, a number of other members of Congress with personal connections, work with the second President Bush to strengthen the law, to strengthen the civil rights protections. And I think a lot of us would not think of the George W. Bush presidency as being a presidency of like progressivism, but I think this shows that, one, the power of personal connection, and two, that indisability bipartisanship was really real. Then in the Obama-Biden era, this is the one I'm much more familiar with personally, it's a little bit different. We're not passing big, sweeping pieces of legislation. The Affordable Care Act in 2010 expanded home and community-based services. It addressed this carve-out that was in the ADA for health insurance. If you read the original, the ADA says, yeah, but this doesn't apply to health insurance. When we talk about the protection for pre-existing conditions, that's addressing part of that problem. Both President Obama was, I think, the first one to have a disability-focused role in his White House in what was called the Office of Public Engagement. President Biden was the first president to have someone in the Office of Public Engagement and in the Domestic Policy Council, which was my job. In 2012, President Obama and somebody else in this room created the Administration for Community Living, which the title of shows the importance of promoting community living in that administration. In the Biden administration, we also did a number of regulatory changes under the statute. So we updated the regulations for the Department of Health and Human Services under Section 504. Those regulations that disability advocates had fought to release in the 1970s. We did a major update to that. We tried to use regulation to eliminate the subminimum wage. We got partway through the process before we, had to leave the administration. But the reason I'm focusing on regulation is because that's something that we could do. We knew, again, it's not an era where we're passing big, sweeping pieces of legislation. It's not an era where you can put together an expert panel and hand legislative recommendations to Congress and they'll do them. That's not the era that we're living in, unfortunately. So we got to work within the parameters that we have. And so in the Obama and Biden administrations, we focused on what we could do through regulations, through attaching pieces of legislation that are moving. In my advocacy and in my lobbying role, that's a lot of what we do, is say, how can I attach this? What is moving? How can I work on this bill and get co-sponsors and get it, get some agreement to it and then attach it to something else? Because that's just not how legislating works these days. We just don't pass these individual, pieces of legislation, and we aren't really passing. Gosh, this sounds so pessimistic, but it's just true. I promise I've got a message for this. These big sweeping pieces of legislation. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention kind of what I did at the beginning of the incredible defensive posture that we're in right now. That's just the nature of the situation, both in Congress and in the administration. We are trying to protect what we have if we can at the federal level. Okay, so let's put it together. So we've gone through history. We've gone through the creation of all of these policies, the times in which they were created, why they look the way that they look based on the politics of the country at the time. So I'm actually going to go forward. So how does it look in the life of a person with a disability today, especially a developmental disability? So because of IDEA in Section 504, they're entitled to education at a public school. including birth through 3, birth through 21. These are policies that you're entitled to. You might be eligible for SSI based on the income of your family. You most likely live at home with your family. As you approach young adulthood, it becomes clear that you need home and community-based services. You're going to need some more supports, which means you need Medicaid, which means you sign up for SSI. When SSI was created, it made sense to make it a Medicaid pathway, right? But now we're stuck in this problem where we've got these income and asset limits. And so to get the home and community-based services, you have to get Medicaid, which means you have to get SSI, and to get SSI, you have to have no money. And we know this is a problem. And especially as we promote employment policy, we keep running into this problem. We also still have the sub-minimum wage. It's been there since 1938. As policies developed, it also forms this partnership with Medicaid where you've got service providers that will pay you the sub-minimum wage, but also maybe get Medicaid dollars. Having each of these programs at the time, when people created them, made sense to them. But it does leave us with this system where we run into these roadblocks because of the history of how each of these were created. And no one sat down and designed the system that we have. It's another one of the takeaways I want to give you. It's a product of its history. So when you're working age, maybe you're working sub-minimum wage, hopefully not, but you're limited by these income and asset limits in SSI. And yes, there's ways around them, but they're complicated, they're hard to understand. You kind of need a lawyer, even if you don't, just to understand how to set it up. So these are the challenges we continue to face because of the history that we have. So what I want to leave you with is how much this is an era of state power. So in education, IDEA in Section 504, they say you have access to an education. But it really depends on what your state and districts are actually doing on a day-to-day basis. What does that actually look like? When I was at the Epilepsy Foundation, where I worked before I went to the White House, we had a legal defense fund, and we would get calls from people all over the country. A lot of them were education calls. And we got a call from a parent that said, my daughter has epilepsy, and the school is telling me she can only go to school when the nurse is there, which is 2 days a week. This is so illegal. It's incredibly illegal. But this parent is calling us to say, okay, I know it's illegal, but what do I do if this is what the district is telling me? And they're just a person in the world. They're trying to do their job and pay their mortgage. What do we do? So yeah, this right exists, but it's up to states and to districts to make it real. On the income side, SSI is this pathway to Medicaid coverage and HCBS, but it limits upward mobility. States can choose different options. They can choose to have higher asset limits. They can choose, California got rid of theirs. They can choose different options, but it's up to the states to do. In employment, states can choose to abolish the sub-minimum wage. They can choose to invest in employment services. And I'm not saying these choices are easy. They all cost money. They're all hard to do. Because of the system that exists, it's hard to make change. You're going to have people who fight you. But what I'm pushing is a lot of these things are at the state level right now. And finally, in Medicaid, home and community-based services are optional. What services you provide are optional. Having a waiting list is optional. These are things the state can change, and the state can choose to make different, working within the structure of the federal government. I would love if we could write bills and change all of these at a national level. And so I'm not saying my job is harder than yours, but these are things that your states can change. So Congress, but they're probably not gonna, at least not right now. Oh, so that's it. So this is the real message. What Stacy and I had talked about was hopefully by going through the history and seeing why it is the way that it is, that helps us all understand how it fits together. Like I said, no one would sit down and design the system and be like, yes, this is how I want it to work. But because of this history, and I also think there's some lessons for the policymaker in this. of, okay, what era am I in now? What pressures am I facing? How will this look in the future? Even when you're making compromises, which we all have to do, what compromises am I willing to make? What compromises am I willing to not make? Especially if I'm setting up a system that might exist for decades past your own tenure. So anyway, that's what I had to say. Thank you very much. I'll turn it to questions. I'm sorry if you couldn't see me, but I can't stand for a whole presentation. But yeah, I'd love to, I think we've got some time to chat a little bit. Yeah.
State directors have a lot of knowledge of how CMS
Mhm.
works and how to access the services between the state and the federal level. How can we as legislators build the bridge of policymaking without just being beholden to state directors who some might be strong in trying to be responsive to communities, and some might be strong in being responsive to the administrative state?
Interesting. So do you mean like what tools are you using? Is it letters? Is it legislation? I know the federal level, so I might not be totally.
I mean, ultimately it goes to the federal level.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm leery to rely on state directors fully because they are trying to follow the guidance of their governor, and we're a different body
Yeah.
that has needs and is responsive and is directly in community.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times when we're trying to do our advocacy and policy change at the state level, then we're interrupting at the federal level at some point. Like, oh, are we going to be able to get another waiver?
Oh, yeah. No, that is a tough position to be in, because I will admit, because my experiences with Congress, my response is like, yeah, haul them up before a hearing and say, what are you doing? In Article 1 of the Constitution, the executive branch is supposed to do what the legislative branch tells them to do. Doesn't always work, but that's how it's supposed to. I think that's a tough situation that you're in. Do you guys like talk to CMS directly, or is that not allowed? No. Okay. So some states do. Some states are talking to CMS directly. I think that's interesting.
I mean, I don't, as an individual policymaker, I just rely on my state director to carry my questions.
Yeah.
However, I could and find out information that would be different than my state director.
Yeah, I don't know. That's one idea that I have. And maybe this is also why it's so great for you folks to be together, to learn from each other. Of like, oh wait, you talk directly to CMS, and how does that work?
So, ladies and gentlemen, if there's questions, let me bring the mic, because we are recording this, so I want to make sure. That was a long question, so who's next? Okay, I'll grab you.
Good morning. I'm Denise from Little Rock, Arkansas. I have several questions. Do you have a comprehensive list of states who, abolished the subminimal wage? Because I think Tennessee might be, because that's a state near Arkansas. Do you have a comprehensive list of what states have done?
Absolutely. Yes.
And can you send that to us?
Yes. And Shay Tanis is right back there. She'll be talking later.
Okay.
She definitely knows. I don't know off the top of my head because there's like too many of them, which is a great problem to have, that I can't list them. But yes, this list exists, as well as both how they did it. Is it through legislation? Is it through an executive order from the governor? Maybe they haven't abolished it, but they're in progress and they've got this plan. Yes, all of that we can share.
Okay.
Yeah.
My second question is, I'm vice chair of our autism task force in Arkansas, and so I'm trying to figure out how to invite people to our meetings. And so, would your group, or can you suggest people who we can get to come in and speak on certain subjects?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd be happy to follow up, depending on what it is, especially if you're okay with virtual. That's going to be much easier.
Okay.
My email is right there up on the screen. Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sally Harrell from Georgia. I appreciate your presentation, first of all, and the history and the culture of the time when the policy was passed drives. It is wonderful. Thank you. And I learned, I got the big picture when you said that SSI is the pathway to Medicaid and home and community-based services. That like puts the big picture in. So thank you for that. And now I'm trying to figure out all the little pieces that I've been struggling with and how that fits into that framework. So we have, for instance, I've been working with our state's VO rehab. And because of a history of fraud coming from the inside, they've gotten really tight about how they hand money out. And so they have this like PeopleSoft vendor system, PeopleSoft system where you have to register as a vendor to get like tuition reimbursement or any money that goes directly to you. And I have a client who basically was saying that that counts against her SSI. But yet this is the way the entire state pays people. They never cut a check to a person. They only cut checks to vendors.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, she had a lawyer saying that was going to jeopardize her SSI, but I didn't know whether I could trust the lawyer or not. This seems like it would be, I hear some heads nodding, like maybe this is going on in other places.
Yeah, I think Katie behind you has something to add.
So I'm Katie Neeson. Before I came to the ARC of the U.S., I oversaw the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services and spent a lot of time in the weeds on the VR program. And sadly, your state had some wackadoodle policies, and was one of there were 6 or 7 states that were not spending all of their federal money. Your state was one of them. Georgia, and one of the things that we tried to tell states was they can change state policies because they thought they couldn't. Like, you can. So that one. 2, Georgia had a policy that you could only get tuition assistance for a institution of higher education that was 35-mile radius from where you lived. So they changed that. But they had barriers within their system that kept them from implementing the law, but they were getting in their own way. So this sounds like another place where the VR agency is getting in its own way and not understanding the consequences of what they're doing. So I would go back to them and say, this is wackadoodle. This is completely inconsistent with the purpose of both of these laws, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to help somebody gain the skills so they can be employed, and you're making it impossible for them to start. Mm-hmm. That makes no sense.
Okay, I'll be empowered to do so then.
Thank you. Mike Pushkin, I'm in the West Virginia House of Delegates. Back to the issue of sub-minimum wage. West Virginia, unfortunately, still has sub-minimum wage on the books. We have tried several times to abolish that in West Virginia. Back when we were able to get it on the agenda, which was a while ago, many delegates and senators, many legislators heard from providers in their districts saying they're going to close down. They won't be able to operate anymore. Now, in the states that have done it, has that been the case, or just fear mongering? Or, I mean, because it gets to the legislators are saying, well, we're going to lose all these services if they can't do that anymore, and people won't have any place to go during the day. That's what we hear.
Yeah, I mean, I'll welcome other folks jumping in as well, but something that states have done is we'll work with providers to transform their services from based on sub-minimum wage to based on something else, be it competitive integrated employment or meaningful daytime services. Because I know, another thing that we definitely heard when we were working on this at the federal level was a lot of concern, especially among parents. Oh, well, my kid won't have anywhere to go during the day. This will be the end of services. This will mean they have nowhere to go. And we also heard people say things like, well, they don't even know what money is. They just need somewhere to go during the day. And my response is, exactly. If you don't know what money is, I don't think you should be working for pay. I think that's exploitative. That's just a value that I have. So let's figure out what else you can be doing, what else we can provide you with that supports you to live a good life where you're integrated in your community. But to answer your specific question, I would say a lot of states have worked with providers to transform the services. There's like a whole lot more detail there that I think we could make sure you get.
I would just remind folks that sometimes the wackadoodle is where you can actually have advanced advocacy that can help over the long term. Because, for example, in Washington State, you would have to at the age of 10, we would make families requalify for developmental disabilities. And when you have a developmental disability, it's a permanent disability. And so why would we make families go through the whole effort, especially in autism, where it's like thousands of dollars to get tested and then retested? So how do we make the burdens easier? So thinking about how, there are big picture things that we've seen on the federal level that we want to impact, but then the wackadoodle policies can actually be things that you can start nipping away at and building the credibility and the coalition building. So you don't have to go with the big apple on the first try. Because I like the minute you said wackadoodle, I was like, oh, that's all I've been working on for the last 5 years. And then that slow movement can help build people, like building trust in the system, actually making change. So don't be afraid of wackadoodle. Let's attack it together.
I can grab her first, and then I'll come back to you. Oh.
Thank you very much for the presentation. What would you say that the advantages are of advancing disability justice in state legislatures relative to federally, where I think, people they're understanding the feel, the vibe, or the texture of politics through the federal level, but state legislatures are often as not where policies that impact people on a real day-to-day level also happen. So what would you say some of the advantages are of pouring advocacy, organizing work into state legislatures versus the federal government?
I think I would say, one, just frankly, the power that you have. Again, depending on your state, depending on your political situation, I don't want to make it sound like it's too easy. The other thing that I have noticed is when you're advocating in Congress, something I say is, you've always got time. You've always got time. They will work until the last possible minute. You've always got time. Things move a lot faster in the state legislature. Sure, is something that I have noticed, and I think this could be a pro or a con. The relationships are a lot more personal, a lot more detailed, and you're. I mean, it sounds such a cliche, but like you're closer to it. That's what I've got. I'd love to hear what other people say.
Thank you so much for the presentation. One of the things that's been really frustrating for me in Kansas is we've tried to abolish the sub-minimum wage, and we've taken some steps, and I feel good about that. But what's frustrating is to hear legislators who are much more about protecting the business owners than they are about helping those who are receiving those sub-minimum wages. However, a good outcome of that has been that we've been able to focus on folks with disabilities at a much younger age, make some changes there, because part of what we have to do is also help to change our hearts and minds of the parents, the families, so that they can have a dream, a vision of their child who may be 3 years old now, but they can see where they can be at 18, 19, and 20. And so helping them kind of come along that journey has really been great, and seeing more disability rights advocates, self-advocates really out there has really been good. So these conversations have come out of us trying to abolish the sub-minimum wage.
That's great. And yeah, I mean, these are also long long advocacy campaigns to change minds.
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer or not. Since you've been on the federal level, I know there's several members that have disabilities. I think, what's her name?
Tammy Duckworth, yep,
Yes.
Senator, yep.
Is there a caucus? Do they have a caucus?
There is a disability caucus, yes. Yes.
Okay.
It's not just of members with disabilities, although they're a part of it, but also people with family members and also people just who we have recruited who are interested. So yes, it exists. Yeah.
So do they have any, like, do they publish, not publish, but, or any of their stuff that they work on? Can we look at it, or is it out there for public consumption?
They don't. So sometimes caucuses do things like that. They have a website. They've got written materials. They've got this. They've got that. The Disability Caucus does not as much. What we use it for mostly is for gaining co-sponsors of legislation, either original sponsors or co-sponsors of legislation, and then helping us promote, if we're holding a briefing or an event on the Hill. So it's a little, they don't produce documents that Katie, have you ever? No, I don't think so. Yeah, not that I'm aware of. So we use it more as an organizing body.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you again for the presentation. I'm Noelle Frame, a state senator here in Washington State. And I just wanted to pick up on the conversation on sub-minimum wage. I think this is actually really interesting how much this is coming up across states. And I would just share a couple things for us here in Washington. To Rep. Taylor's earlier point about incrementalism, like we went for the whole thing and we couldn't win that a year, but we took the state being a model employer first. And like that was our first step so that Washington State wouldn't do sub-minimum wage anymore as an employer. And I think maybe like 3 years later, Senator Randall got elected, who is a sibling, and was like, let's go for the whole thing. Whereas I've been the prime for the first one. Senator Randall came in and was like, let's go for that next step, and I think was able to help move us further faster. The second thing I would say is what you mentioned, self-advocates. And I think self-advocates here, the SAIL is our self-advocates and leadership group. The SAIL advocates, I mean, they were really the ones that were out in front and really dispelling misconception about what it looked like for a person with an intellectual or developmental disability to be in the workforce. And I would say they really won over hearts and minds. And it was families and it was employers, but really for us, it was really the families that were saying exactly what you said, Rachel, that my kid's not gonna have anywhere to go, they're gonna lose their job and all of that. And that's a really hard conversation to balance, but I think the self-advocates were really the one that kept that conversation in check and in balance. So I can't speak to, I'm looking at Stacy and Kathy about kind of where we ended up in terms of all of our work, and I think generally speaking, no, the sky did not fall, like it's fine. But it also strikes me as like, we used other states as a model where we're like, look at all these other states that have already done it. This is absurd that we're still doing this. I wonder if there isn't a bit of a case study out of like our state and other states that say, look, the sky didn't fall when we did this. The jobs didn't get all eliminated that could be helpful to those that are still moving that path forward. So not to volunteer Washington State, but Stacey or Kathy, anything that you would add from where we ended up?
We probably are still challenged in making the transition of the model. So one of the big topics now in the state legislature here is what do we do about day programs? Because we didn't solve that problem at the same time. Incrementally, sort of one step at a time. Let's go with what the rights are and what affects people. And now we're still working on that. But it is really just a shift in model, how you perceive what people are doing and how they're doing it, that legislatures can help with. Does that make sense? Kathy, would you add something to that?
And I think over the course of time, what we found was that what somebody observed is that there's folks that really weren't working and transferring over to doing other things. A lot of them ended up retiring because they were just about retirement age. But doing those pieces, but yeah, the sky did not fall. And most of those folks landed well.
Another question for Rachel, and we'll move on to our next speaker.
Hi, Rebecca Saldana, also from Washington State, and I'll just say, as someone that has not been as involved, I come from labor, but having that bill in our committee, it was having people and families and the workers themselves speaking up that made it really, compelling for us to take action. And from a worker perspective, it was really, I think a lot of us didn't even know, right, that this was still on the books. One question, or just more organizing suggestion, is there does seem to be so many experts at this, here today, and hearing what the congressional caucus is like, it seems like inviting them to the next one, because it seems like there could be more strategy inside outside between the feds and the locals that could be inspiring to them, and maybe like encourage them to actually think about their caucus and how to make it more powerful. So thank you.
I'm sorry about all these questions. In our session that just wrapped up, I was able to introduce legislation to help people with students with disabilities when they go to higher ed. There's a lot of information that is lacking in that side of after you leave K-12 and then you go to higher ed. Do you know anybody that's working in that space? Because basically the bill that I did was how do we better monitor the data? How do we get correct data, and how we helping our people who need help, and are the supports adequate? And I don't know how to build upon the bill, because it's a lot out there that we don't know. And so I'm just asking if you know anybody that's working in that space, in the higher ed
I
space.
might phone a friend for my friends in the room, because education is not very much not my space. I mean, I do what I can, but.
There is data. I think, Katie, the National Longitudinal Transition Study that was funded for so long was capturing that national data that could do it. But there are lots. I think one of the things we know is that there are a lot of experts that have been working on these types of issues for a very long time. Certainly the TIPS and grants, which help higher ed getting people in. It's just a matter of getting you all connected to the right people for the resources, which I'm hoping we're going to be able to do today.
And those post-secondary ed committees that you have. There's a lot of work in that space, but it's not connected yet to legislation and funding. Any more questions for Rachel real quick? We want to move on to our next speaker. One more, and then and Rachel, will you be here a little bit longer, or are you leaving right away?
A little bit longer, yeah.
Okay.
Since I've highlighted Georgia's wackadoodle policies, I did want to say that we did pass our Dignity in Pay Act this year, which ends the subminimum wage. Yay, Georgia. It did have a phase out until 2027, and I think that allows, there wasn't a lot left in Georgia in terms of paying subminimum wage, but what there is a phase out until 2027, so I think that helps.
Okay, can we all, one more. I can't say no to her.
Just want to remind folks, you have, what are these called? Post-its, sorry. You have Post-its on your table. Write down your questions, and when we get a break, please put them on the wall. We'll collect these questions. That's a lot of great ideas that are coming up, a lot of inspiration. Let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you, and can we all give Rachel a round of applause? Amazing. Thank you.